I'm just sticking here like this, is that work?
It probably will work with that. Good evening. My name is Leslie M. Scott Jones. I am the curator of learning engagement and public programs here at the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center. I am also the artistic director of the Charlottesville Players Guild, and I am so excited for this next conversation during our Wilsonian Soldiers Symposium. My dear friend, Ms. Bates, talking with August Wilson's brother, Edwin Kittel. And we called this talk Discovering Wilson, in part for the background and history of life that we're going to get, but also for the unique perspective of familial connections on artistic creation. So, Ms. Nye, take it away.
Leslie, thank you so much for that introduction. Just making sure people can hear me with this mic. Awesome. I'm going to use the mic. I don't think everybody has to use the mic, but I'm kind of quiet, so that's what we'll do this evening.
I'll try it like this. Does this work for you?
It does.
Okay, I'm good. I'm good.
Perfect. As you heard, my name is Naya Bates, and I am a historian and current graduate student studying history. I'm a 19th century historian, but tonight we're here to talk about the 20th century and the prolific career of August Wilson. But we're also here to talk about family history, family connections, because so much of what got included in those plays and so much of the material that inspired his creative body of work was inspired by the way that you all grew up. So I wanted to start this conversation kind of talking about those things.
Okay. I don't think it was so much of what we grew up, I think it was our surroundings. As August got older, the voices he heard, on the block and the rest of us and sitting around and do the station, et cetera.
Actually, yeah, you're right.
All right, this work?
Yes.
Okay. I don't think it was so much as what was in our household itself. It was voices outside in the neighborhood that he heard as a young man and as he was growing up, and what he went through as a young black man. And I think that was the foundation for his book.
And you all grew up in Pittsburgh, correct?
Pittsburgh.
So much of what animated his stories is your life in a historic black neighborhood in Pittsburgh. Right?
Absolutely.
What is the name of it? Yeah, the Hill District, right? So tell us a little bit about some of the people that your brother would have encountered and, breathe life into their stories with this. I know there's a doctor that shows up multiple times.
Dr. Goldblum?
Yeah.
Dr. Goldblum, he lived next to Aunt Julie. And Julie, I don't think he brought into the place. Uncle Charlie, though, Aunt Julie's husband, he was a garbage man for Pittsburgh for many years, and he retired. Now, whether he used Troy as Uncle Charlie, who knows? But if he did, it was to pay tribute to Charlie, because Uncle Charlie was a middleweight boxer, and he never really had a chance to establish his career as far as he wanted to, because Uncle Charlie wouldn't take any bribes, which means integrity. And Uncle Charlie went on to be brief with this. He went on to knock Archie Moore out. He knocked Archie Moore out because he couldn't get a fight with the middleweight, so he started fighting heavyweights.
I think we have time for a few more details about that.
he knocked Archie Moore out. So if he used Troy at all as the garbage man to pay tribute to Uncle Charlie, and that's what he did. But we actually knew a Troy in our life. And I can remember Troy was a young man. And so August was his name.
So
I just used fences, okay?
Okay. So Dr. Goldblum shows up in Jitney, in Joe Turner's Coming On, Fences, and Studying Guitar. So he's a recurring character inspired by someone in your real life. Are there other recurring characters in your brother's plays inspired by people you knew?
Not recurring.
Not recurring.
Not
Okay.
recurring. Not that I can recall. Not recurring.
Are there members of your family who made it into the plays?
Absolutely not.
Interesting. You say absolutely not. Was that a conscious decision?
I don't
Do you
think
think
so. I think he just wrote the characters the way they came out. Now, did he honor the family and the siblings? Absolutely. Radio golf, all of our birthdays are in radio golf as addresses. So, yes, piano lesson, he dedicated that to the siblings. So, over there, but characters on stage,
So one of the big themes in the plays is migration. And you all are children of immigrants, but also of the Great Migration, where 6 million African American people moved from the American South to escape various conditions of racism and violence and other oppressive forces that inspired them to move elsewhere to seek better opportunities. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your own family's story. For the folks who weren't here the other night, we gave the genealogy talk. If you could help us understand your family's experiences of migration.
well, okay. You just want to go from migration forward? Okay. My family lived in Spear, North Carolina. They lived on a mountain known as Spear Top. And in 1935, Sarah Ella, who was my great-grandmother, passed away. I think the month is May. And 2 months later, that's when my mother, my Aunt Faye, Uncle Ray, Uncle Arthur, Vera, there was quite a few, Maud, and Eileen, they all traveled to Pittsburgh. Now, back in those days, 1935, Pittsburgh was a long way off. So it took me a minute or two to stop and think about how far were they able to travel and where did they stay, because they just couldn't come to Pittsburgh. They had to have stops. As a young man, I lived in Wise County, Virginia, and I have a coal mining years there. And Wise County shows up on a marriage license of one of my grandmother's brothers. And I'm thinking, why would you get married somewhere where you don't have a connection? So I went on and I moved on. And then they show up he shows up in West Virginia, and he's a coal miner. And then his other brother shows up as well, is in West Virginia. When I have to jump back to Bynum and my grandmother Zona, they left in 1926, and they were married in Elizabethton, Tennessee, and once again, they stopped in Wise County. Okay, something's going on. If you've ever traveled that route, if you're in, say, Abingdon, Virginia, let's use Abingdon as an example because everybody knows that as they go by. Going up to Whitfield to go in was the way that we traveled. The old Cherokee travel is a little different, and that's the road system that was in play back in the early 1900s, which if you go to Abingdon and you take 19 North, that swings you around through, gosh, 40 years. I believe the town is Hansonville. I'm not sure. Was that right? I know it's a great big curve on 19. There's a big mountain there. 58 goes off this way. So I'm thinking that Hansonville, it's been 40 years since I've been through there. And that was the old Cherokee Trail, and that went up into West Virginia. A little further in my research, I come up with Tazewell, Virginia. Well, Tazewell is not too far from Wise County. If you look at the map, that's a day's travel back then, on horseback, of course. And so they had to have a way to come north. My research shows recently that there was a relative in Wise County. So that was definitely one of their stops. Now, after they left Wise County, they went up, that's right. And after they went up into West Virginia, Bynum worked in one of the coal mines there. He was in an old colored coal camp. And then he worked his way on up into Pittsburgh. And Zona and Bynum arrived in Pittsburgh sometime after 1930. Because in 1930, they show up on the census in West Virginia. And then they started having kids around 34 and 35. So they were in Pittsburgh. So he made enough money to get them the rest of the way up. Now, Uncle Arthur had made several trips to Pittsburgh, starting from 1910 up. He would travel to and from Pittsburgh. And that was another key for me too, because he just couldn't get on the road in a truck and go. And there's all kind of people out there that want to say, oh, he sold Christmas trees, or he sold watermelons because of piano lesson, that he sold watermelons. You know, I'm thinking to myself, I mean, this is my question to him. Why would he come all the way from North Carolina with watermelons? A truck of watermelons, you think a black man on a pickup truck back then, and they didn't hold a lot of watermelons, did it? So, scratch that one off. So there was other reasons why he came. Now, during that time when Uncle Arthur came to Pittsburgh, between those years, he had Maud with him, which would have been his sister-in-law, because Uncle Arthur married my grandmother's sister. So that's his Uncle Arthur. Then, as Naya was saying, racism in the South at that time too. And what sort of forced us into migration was our family was being disassembled. And by disassembled, I mean that the young men, Starling and the rest of them that were on the mountain, that was my grandmother's brothers, they were kind of like given a choice. You want to go to prison or you want to leave the state? They were smart, they left the state. And so that left only the women on the mountain, with the exception of Uncle Arthur traveling back and forth, because Bynum was living in Cleveland, North Carolina, and he was already married. And him and my grandmother had a child together in 1917, my Aunt Faye. And so she is the only Wilson. From the mountain, there was 3 born on the mountain: Aunt Faye, my mother, and Uncle Ray. And so jumping back to migration, when Uncle Arthur came after Sarah Ella passed away and we started migrating north, I figured out we had stops along the way. And then when they arrived in Pittsburgh, my mother was 16, going on 16, and that was a hard life. They all lived in one house.
They walked or they drove?
They drove. Uncle Arthur brought them up. Yeah, Uncle Arthur drove them up. That was one of the examples. Is back then the road system wouldn't allow you to, so you had to have stops along the way, and that took a while to figure out why they stopped and who they stopped and who they were with.
Well, ultimately, they end up in Pittsburgh in a neighborhood that is very diverse, right? There are Black families in the neighborhood, there are Italian families, there are Jewish families, so and German families. So tell us a little bit about what the culture of the neighborhood is like.
Diverse.
Yeah.
Diverse. My memory of growing up there was that back in the 50s, you go outside to play outside of your house, everybody was your mother because they told you what to do. And if you messed up, then they would tell your mother, you go home and pay the price. So, but that's the type of neighborhood it was back in the 50s and early 60s. And because we moved away from the hill in 58, and we moved to Hazelwood. Flyers Avenue, 303 Flyers Avenue. We were living on Flyers Avenue. And somebody threw a brick through our window and said, "Niggers, you gotta go." That was the note on the brick. And we moved from Flyers Avenue, which was the white section of Hazelwood, to Sylvan Avenue, which was the black section of Hazelwood. It was right across from Gladstone High School. Did I answer or got lost in it?
You did.
There's so much history there. I mean, there's so much history.
There's a ton of history there. You know, one of the things I find interesting in your brother's story is that he dropped out of high school because of the environment there, correct?
He dropped out of high school because he was accused of plagiarism for writing the paper. And they said that one of my sisters wrote the paper, and August actually wrote the paper. And so from that point on, August dropped out of school. The funny thing is, we lived right across from Gladstone High School. The steps, you walk out our front door, there was the steps to go up to school. Off to the right was a basketball court. August would go play basketball. How come my mother never saw me? I don't know. And I never asked him that question because I thought, wow, you escaped that asshole, didn't you? So, yeah.
So it's at that point then that he picks up a number of odd jobs, right? He works briefly as a porter.
No.
Okay.
And after he dropped out of Gladstone High School, that's when he started his education. That's when he started going to the libraries and reading anything that dealt with Black history whatsoever. He read it. And as well as going over into Oakland and reading stuff from the library as well. Then he started getting little odd jobs at that time. One of them was in Pittsburgh, they used to sell the newspaper on those metal stands. They would stand them up and, you want Post-Gazette, press. And it was right at the bottom on 2nd Avenue, down from the houses, one of the entrances to J&L. And I used to go down with him to sell papers. And one morning, I was down there, and he's like, okay, take these newspapers, get on the streetcar, ask the driver if he wants to buy a newspaper, and then kicks the other trolley back or walk back. And I'm like, okay. So I get on the trolley, I ask the driver, do you want a newspaper? The driver tells me no, so I get off at the next stop, and I walk back. And he says, how many papers did you sell? I said, well, I asked the driver. He said, you didn't want one. Oh, man, you were supposed to walk through the trolley and sell them. So that was part of my education too, learning how to hustle. So, but yeah, so I remember that. Then he went on to little odd jobs, shovel snow, cut grass, and then there's when we were living in, because we moved from Sylvan Avenue to Homewood on Merlin Avenue, 617 North Merlin, and he was cutting grass for a gentleman that was cutting grass professionally. And he went to cut this one lady's lawn, and she came running out the house saying, no, I don't want him to cut my grass. So the owner came over to August and said, oh no, man, you go cut this other grass here. And August said, no, I'm cutting this grass. And the man said, no, you go down there and cut one. And August at that point would cut grass for the rest of his life. Because he walked away because the lady was a racist and wouldn't allow a Black person to cut her grass in Squirrel Hill. He never told me who it was in their dress, so I don't know. But that's the story behind it. One more. So then, from that, he moved to California.
So he moves a couple different places, right? He moves to California, then Minneapolis.
California is the learning years.
Tell us more about California.
There you go.
Yeah.
Maybe to be interested in that.
Yeah.
California was a learning years for him because as a young Black man, after he did his stint in service, he went to California. In California, he learned racism as an adult. Like in California back in the 60s, they stopped a Black man, throw him up against the wall, throw him on the car, beat the hell out of him, do whatever they wanted to do, and throw him in jail. And that was part that he learned. But at the same time, he still enriched himself with history, poetry, plays, et cetera, because when he came home, I hope I can remember this poet's name. If I butcher it, I'm sorry, just don't get it when I get there. Bukowski. I want to say Bukowski from California was a poet, a white poet, that lived on Skid Row. That's the poetry he gave me to read. He said, here, you want to learn something, read this. And I was like, oh, okay. So, and out there, he did various odd jobs. Never a poet. I don't know where that one came from.
So that's a myth.
That's a myth.
Oh, okay.
I wonder, tell me where did it come from?
I read it in one of the write-ups in a conversation with you about the doctor. So I don't know if the reporter just threw in that detail.
I don't know.
It was not part of the quote.
I must have missed that one. But are you talking about where Larry Glasgow said that my sister said somebody beat me up and I had to.
It wasn't that one.
There's another one?
There's another one.
I'll have to look.
Okay, I'll send you.
Because
the
I
link
corrected
after.
that one. I corrected.
Yeah, this one says that you corrected details about the doctor.
Yeah.
But maybe they added that later. But I had kind of a follow-up question. So he's steeping himself in poetry and he's reading about Black history and culture, but then he encounters jazz and Bessie Smith, right?
That's later.
Yeah, so what are his musical influences beyond Bessie Smith? Or
Blues.
jazz includes, right?
Blues. That was my introduction as well. Because, as you know, I left home at probably age 16. And August was living, when he came back from California, he was living down the street. And I would go visit him, big brother, he'd come out the house, I'd go down there. And he was living in this basement apartment. And I went in and he had 78 stacked up to where if you walked in, you couldn't see him on the other side of the 78. And I walked in and Bessie Smith was on. And he's like, man, you gotta listen to this. And he pulls me around there and he had all kind of papers. He had just a door for a desk. And they were all piled up, the ashtray was full. And music everywhere, the place was smoking. And I'm listening to Bessie Smith, so that was my introduction. And blues stayed with him. Jazz, not so much. The blues. Yes.
Which makes sense. I mean, the blues are migration music, right?
Lyrics, stories.
Right.
And if you listen to the blues, any blues song has a story in it. And the story is part of our history. And if you listen to it, you may like the tune, but listen deeper and you'll be a part of the Black history.
So the 60s and the early 70s are this period of deep education.
Very.
And then when does he turn to theater and writing?
Black Horizon
Black
Theater.
Horizon Theater.
Black Horizon Theater in Pittsburgh. Rob Kenny, Nick Illinois, Charlie P. Saladin. Saladin didn't write it. Saladin wanted to be an actor, so he was part of that group too. And that was in the late 60s. And that's when he got steeped into playwriting and his poetry and everything else. So that was about that time.
And then critical acclaim came shortly thereafter, right? With the 80s.
Yeah, he worked hard through the 70s though. He ate a lot of beans and rice, But yeah, St. Paul, Minnesota. By that time in St. Paul, he had already written Jitney. Jitney was actually written in the late 70s. And then he wrote Black Art in Sacred Hills, which production was done at the Milford Theater in St. Paul. And then, but then there's, he wrote Ma Rainey. And Ma Rainey was accepted at the O'Neill, and that's what launched his career on Broadway. But as a playwright, I feel personally, he'd already established himself with Jitney, Black Art in Sacred Hills and Fullerton Street. And then off with Ma Rainey, which was accepted and eventually went on to Broadway.
So with each of these plays, your brother breathed life into these hyper-local stories. They are about small instances in individuals' lives, but they have such salience for larger narratives about history and our culture. So I wonder if you could shed some light on how, or on his process, I guess. Were you
That was his process.
bear witness to his process?
That was his process. That was his process.
Okay.
I'm just going to sit down and poetry. You just come up with these characters. And you just start writing. And you write. I have to jump forward a few years, a lot of years. And to give you an example, is he would be in town and I'd go down to the hotel and I'd walk in the door and the next thing I know, he's Mr. Zawicki and I got to jump in the ad lib because, he's throwing lines and I have to understand what he's doing. And if I did it wrong, he said, oh man, you don't know what you're doing. And it was his thought process, and then he would just continue on. He would draw you in to his characters. One night, 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm sitting at home and I'm working downstairs. At my desk, and the phone rings. It's August, and he's like, "Oh man, I got a guy with a radio, carrying a radio, and the chicken numbers on. Have a good night." Click. So it was. He would draw you in and then develop things from that. It just his imagination. Not only his imagination, but it was the twist of how to put it together in a story that you could understand and follow. And that's what's so nice about his work is his poetry. And then his poetry background allows him to do it. He lets the characters sing, tell their own story. Another thing you have to look at when you look at August's plays and his characters. Every one of his characters that go on stage, whether you think they're good, evil, or whatever, integrity. They all have integrity. No matter who the character is, integrity. Because I argued that. I was like, King Hitler killed somebody. Hitler killed somebody. And then after I thought about it, and had a discussion, yeah, he had integrity because he killed him right over that damn money. So to come on, you never have King Hitler because if Hitler didn't kill him. So.
And it's the same with Ma Rainey's Black Bottom.
Oh, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Oh, now you're talking, girl. Is when, in my opinion, of what he tried to show then, goes back to, I'm getting in trouble for this one. That's okay. I'm gonna do it. That's when the white folks would come down south, and they would get the blues ones, and the piano players from the Jew joints, and they would say, "Oh, let's record this. I'll give you $5. I'll give you $10," and they would record the music. And if you got to where one of the producers would want to bring you up north to Detroit or Chicago to record, then that was big time for you. But that was another way of them stealing our history from us. That's my opinion. And he shows that in a way in Ma Rainey. Although Mom was a tough woman, she stood up, but so she knew what was going on, and she knew what she had, and what she had, they wanted. And in the end, Ma got cheated too. So in my opinion, Ma got cheated. But that's what they did with our music. I'll give you one good example of an artist that I like, Mississippi John Hurt. He was first discovered in the early years of the 1900s. He doesn't appear again until when in the 60s or 70s, he reappears with Avalon Blues. So it was a way of them not only taking what we had, but also kicking us to the curb at the same time. In other words, we ain't done what you yet, you still gonna be ours, and this is how we're gonna do it. My opinion.
And it must have been important to August to tell that story, especially because that is one of the only century cycle plays that is not set in Pittsburgh.
Like I said, he had to tell a story.
Yeah.
Pittsburgh didn't have recording studios.
Right.
So where are you going to take it?
Right. Either Detroit or Chicago.
Yeah. So that's what he did.
Yeah, that's amazing. So before I open it up to our audience to join the conversation.
No, we ain't done.
No, we're not done. We're not done. We got a couple more. I was going to say, I have a few more.
In other words, I need some.
Yeah.
I got you.
I want to hear more about that decade of the 80s. I mean, that is such a busy decade. The pinnacle of that is the Pulitzer. 2 Pulitzers, right? So I want to hear more about how your brother is growing in that decade, what those conversations are like behind the scenes. Is he staying humble?
August has always been humble. If you've ever met him on the street or at intermission at one of the shows, or even after one of the shows, he gave you his time. He was there at intermission. He was there as they opened the doors, and he was there afterwards to talk with you, to do autographs, because August, you have to go back to his speech. on the ground on which I stand to really understand August. A lot of people say, oh, they like that speech. And I've talked to people and I said, do you understand what it means? Yeah. Well, you're not doing what you want. And I tell them that, and people tell me I'm coming at them sideways. Well, if the truth hurts, bear it, you know. And so by him giving his time to the audience, both white, black, orange, green, yellow, whatever, he took the time to talk to you, and he talked to you with respect. He didn't talk above your head or below you. August has always been a humble person. We want to go back to the 80s. Okay. Where do you want to start?
Where?
Well, we just, I did the 80s with the director was up here, so I'll start with that.
Yeah.
I'll start with that. One of the pet peeves that I have is that in 1980, August was living on Grand Avenue, Brandondale in St. Paul, Minnesota. And at that time, he was entering a contest to be a playwright at the Playwrights Lab in Minnesota, Minneapolis, Minnesota. And that's when he came up with the bright idea that he was going to write 10 plays for each decade of the Black experience in America. And I still stick to that. When I hear Century Cycle or American Cycle, I disagree, but I had somebody explain it to me tonight, how they felt about it, and I can agree to disagree. But to me, it's always going to be the Black experience in America. I'm sorry, he drilled that in my head, and I was a young man, so it's still there.
We like correcting the narrative, so we'll go with that.
So after Fullerton Street, he wrote, our mother got sick, and then his mommy was diagnosed. Ma Rainey went to a meal. So our mother, in our thing, went up to see Ma Rainey at the O'Neill. And she did see Jitney in Pittsburgh, a production in Pittsburgh. And then after Jitney, Fences came along. And Fences, I feel, was really one of his deepest works. Because if you look at Fences, he doesn't draw any of our life into it. But life is August Seward, solid groundless. The strong male figure, Troy, Rose, strong black woman. The son that always needed some money, named Elvin. And then the son that went away to service. And Troy has a child with another woman, and Rose takes her in. And so he shows what a black family is all about. And it was about, and Rose was the one that kept that unit together. Rose was, because she couldn't kick Troy out of the house. She had every right to kick Troy out of the house. But for the love of a family and the love of a child, she held that family together. And if you go back in our history, slavery ripped us apart. And all through the 1800s, even after slavery, they still ripped us apart. Because then, Hartsman Farms come up, and you're going to jail for anything. You look sideways, you're going to jail for 10 years. And, okay, let's build this road. Let's make this man rich, get out there and pick that cotton. And that's how the South says they industrialized. No, they didn't. They just enslaved us in a different way. That's all. Oh, I can't keep going. Sorry. I got off. And then after, that's what he showed with Fences and what I see. Gabe is a fictional character, okay? We didn't know anybody like Gabe, all right? So Gabe, he threw Gabe up on his own, and that was really a neat character that Troy was taking care of his brother. So that's not part of family history, okay? Because a lot of people have said to me, Edwin, that's you. How in the world can that be me? First of all, I don't play the trumpet. Second of all, I take care of myself, so how can that be me? And it goes back to when I was in the service. I had a head injury. But the character is not me, and August is said 1,000 times, it's not me. Because one of my sisters says, Edwin, that's you. No, it's not me. Because Gabe can't take care of himself, and for dinner. He's got to come and get a sandwich. I can make my own sandwiches. So I defended that. Then he turns up and he writes, I can't remember the order, so I'm gonna go with what's in my head. So Joe Turner Come and Gone comes along. He had 2 plays on Broadway at the same time. The Walter Kerr Theater, which is now the August Wilson Theater, and the 46th Street Theater, which is where Fences were. And I saw both versions of Fences, James Earl Jones and Billy D. Williams. Who did the women like most? Billy D. Williams. The women in the audience, I was sitting up there and I was watching Fences, and Billy D. was on stage, and he started gyrating. I swear, every woman in that theater went, "Woo! Oh yeah, baby! I got you. Are you going home with me tonight?" Every woman in that theater had something to say about him on stage, and August loved that. He loved that the way, because all of his plays, he draws you right in there. No matter which one you go see, you feel like you're part of it as you sit. Just his dialogue, and he just ropes you in. And once you want more, because when you leave, you're still talking. You're still talking about it. I'm like that. Now we're going to go to where we go next. Hold on. Give me a second. No, it wasn't that. The diner. Thank you. 2 trains running. There you go. 2 trains running. Sorry, I always want to drop that one for some reason. The 2 trains running. Stop and think about it. Because I had to. Because when I went and saw the play, I was like, 2 trains running. There's a damn train in there. And then it's people going in the opposite directions. Once again, he draws you in. If I'm not mistaken, that's a play in we were talking about that here. I want my hand. That's the play. I want my hand. And he shows a diner because he did work at Pat's, and Pat was on the Hill District. Was it Pat's? Yeah. It was the only one that was fired. So, yeah, so he shows his history with the diner, what he heard in the diner, and about the history of ours. Then comes piano lesson. That's a good one. Piano lesson, he shows a lot of the Black history that happened in the South during the 30s, 40s, and 50s, even going back to the early, that I know of. I'm not going to go back to the 1800s because we know what happened back then. But from say the 1880s, 1890s forward, in the South, a lot of the whites in the South were actually stealing from Black landowners, and they wanted to make them sharecroppers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's when they persecuted a lot of people, Black folks in the South. So piano lesson, to me, shows that. And it shows it through Boy Willie, because Boy Willie is real adamant about going back and getting the other part of his land. And Bernice is already established, but she understands. And they have their history on the piano, and it's been brought to my attention that we had a piano inherited to us. If we did, it was probably a little toy piano, because there is no piano in our history. There is no inheritance of a piano in our history, and they go back to Sarah Ella. They say Sarah Ella inherited property and a piano. No, that's not true. So by doing that and using the piano, goes back to our African ancestry, where in the tribes, the staff told the story. You go back and all of their staffs tell a story. So you couldn't use the staff, so we used the piano. And it shows the ghost. The ghost is important to me because it's the past haunting. To me, is what it is. The tree coming through the window, the fight, is never giving up. Never giving up, no matter what odds you face, you go head on and you deal with it. So to me, it shows a lot of our history in piano lesson. dope on the train. He gets to travel everywhere. And they all, and notice in the play, they all spend time with people on Parson Farm. And they all know Berta Berta. So that was important. And then after, trying to think, after piano lesson, then came Seven Guitars. Chicago, the Goodman Theater is where it premiered, Lizard Night too. And that's one of my favorite plays to see as well. And this is a little story I'm going to tell about that. Oh, that's when I first noticed Viola Davis was Seven Guitars in Chicago. And I remember asking August about her. And I said, she's going to really develop. And there was another actress, I believe her name is Roz. Roz was in piano lesson. So, but that was the first time that I noticed. See, just like right now, I forgot her too. Viola Davis. And my favorite thing about Seven Guitars when it opened in New York was that Sakina, who was August's daughter, her grandfather, who was in his 90s, was with his 80-something-year-old girlfriend sitting in front of me. And off on the other side of us was Revered's daughter, and then me and Sakina. Well, I enjoyed Mr. Bird and his girlfriend because they talked the whole play. They talked the whole play. When they brought the chicken sandwiches out, she was like, "Oh yeah, I love him right now." So they talked the whole play. So I had to go back the next day to see the play because I enjoyed them so much. They were sitting in front because Sakina said, "Did you like the play?" I was like, "Sakina, your grandfather and his girlfriend, I watched him the whole play. The whole play. They talked, they did everything. They laughed, they giggled, but that chicken sandwich that stuck in my head." Yeah, you figure he's in his 90s, his girlfriend was in her 80s, but then you come to find out they were really good friends and that she lived in New York. So I assumed that was his girlfriend. But at that age, hey, you had a woman, what can I say?
Right, so community affair all around.
Absolutely. And if you stop and think about his plays, that's what it was about. He tried for the audience right now.
Exactly. So the remaining couple of plays, Jim of the Ocean and Radio Golf,
You think that?
and King Hedley. Oh, I was going to end on King Hedley since we finished.
Oh, Jim of the Ocean, I've never seen. To this day, I've never seen Jim of the Ocean. What's the other one?
Radio Golf.
Radio Golf, I saw. Radio Golf.
The 90s.
Yeah, it's the 90s. It's the 90s. That shows a lot of what was going on as far as property goes. And what he showed was the communities trying to bring back what they used to have, and for it to be black in the 90s. I think that was a hard play for him. That's my opinion, because when you look at the 90s, rap was out, and I think personally he had a hard time with that. But at the same time, he was able to pull it off with his poetry and showing another side. So I would say that. So the 90s was a very tumultuous period in our history too, especially in the Hill District, because the Hill District was gone. I mean, the riots wiped it out, and everybody left. There wasn't any businesses. We had one grocery store left, and it never came back. I can remember the AMP being there as a child, then Safeway back in the 70s and early 80s, and then that left as well. So, in my opinion, Radio Golf, I'm gonna just leave it I'm gonna leave it at that. That's not one of my favorite plays. It's not one of mine, but that's the play that he honored all of us in with our birthday.
As addresses.
As addresses in the play.
So I do want to open the floor up to the audience for questions, but I have a final question.
You said that last time.
That's what, yeah, so now we're really at the time for the final question.
You tired? I'm getting started.
I'm not tired, but I do want to respect everyone's time. So, and I don't want to leave out King Hedwig. So we just finished doing the entire cycle that we're now calling the American History Cycle.
You call it the American History
Is
Cycle?
that what we're calling it? The African American History Cycle?
You're asking.
Your preferred title.
My preferred title
Yeah.
was Black Experience. in
Black
America.
Experience in America. So we just finished that with King Hedwig. And, you know, recognizing that Radio Golf is not one of your favorites, although I think the two plays kind of hit on similar themes, kind of the depressed economics of the 80s and 90s.
Radio Golf, they were rebuilding.
And they were rebuilding. Right. And so now we're,
Black-owned businesses and banks too.
Exactly.
Yeah, there was banks in the 90s with black businesses as well.
exactly. But all things are cyclical.
Yes.
Right? And so here we are, 30 years past the the setting of both of those plays. And we're still dealing with many of the same issues. And I think that August Wilson's plays are salient and relevant to a lot of people because we are still working through these different cultural issues. So I wonder, this is a convoluted way of asking about his legacy and what you hope to see. I mean, Fences, we saw recently turned into a blockbuster film. Of course, I think it's a good film, but I'd love to hear your opinion.
There you go.
But do you want to see more of them turned into motion pictures?
Like I said before, I'm saying this. There was a book written once. I'm setting this up and then I'll get rid of it. There was a book that somebody wrote, and it's titled, I Ain't Sorry for Nothing I've Done This Year. I just got together, my inscription says that title. Edwin ain't sorry for nothing he said and done neither. And he signed it. And he signed it. So, when it comes to the films, if you haven't seen the plays and you watched the movies, you give it a thumbs up. And I criticize that because, number one, there was no dancing girls in Bahrain. I mean, I've never seen the movie, just so you know. I saw the commercial, and I clicked, and I turned it off. When it comes to Fences, I went, what? And then somebody told me that August wrote the script. I'm like, no, he didn't. No, he didn't. Remember the little story I told you about? I walked in the hotel, Mr. Zawicki was sitting there asking me a question, and I had to sit down and have that with him. Mr. Zawicki. If you know Fences, you know Mr. Zawicki. So, and that's when he was rewriting the script for Paramount when Eddie Murphy Productions was involved. Now, and I've said this privately, and I guess now I'm going to say it publicly. In order to understand August, if you don't know him, don't say you do. Don't say you understand him. If you understand August, and you know who August is, whether you met him, talked to him for 5 minutes or whatever, you still don't know. Go back and read his speech on the ground on which I stand. Once you read that speech and you understand the meanings that fall through that speech, that shows who he is. And people still don't give it. They still say he wrote 10 plays, 10 fantastic, great plays. And if you want to add a few more, add 11, add Melvin, and like Mark Sacred Hills, add Fullerton Street. Go back to the early Cold Steady. I mean, you have to go back and look at his early work and how he progressed and came forward. Because just to say, oh man, I saw all 10 of them, I met him once and we sit down and we had dinner. No. So you had dinner, you had a conversation. You don't understand him, so you don't understand his work. People say adaptation, and they adapt things to his plays. Why do you have to adapt to what he already has? All you have to do is listen to the stories in the play. If you want to adapt to something, don't come off. You didn't. I seen a car on stage. There's no car on stage. You didn't. I actually saw a play, excuse me, a production where they actually brought a baby on stage. That's a character. You can't do that. I don't care how much liberty you take. You cannot bring another character in a play on stage. And somebody brought a baby. The young lady had a baby in her arms. So, did I answer your question?
I think that answered my question. But
No, I get a lot of, just so you know, I get a lot of guff about that. But you know what? Like I said, I ain't sorry for nothing I said or done either. Because I always tell the truth. When they ask me a question, I tell you.
Well, thank you so much. We are at time. So we are going to take some questions from the audience. I think we have time. We have 2 or 3. For one. We have time for one good question.
Can we turn this?
Absolutely.
Are we still filming?
We are. We are.
Oh,
We're still filming.
leave the light on that. Oh, well, I don't know, turn it off.
All right, this question is coming from Ms. Corey, and I'm going to come back.
You already heard me.
I was going to say, I can take a scenic route to get to you.
Hopefully my one good question is good. So I'm curious about the spirituality in a lot of his plays, and I've only seen Gem of the Ocean and King Hedley, and so I'm thinking about a stool pigeon and all the biblical references. And then I'm also thinking about Aunt Esther and her connection to what's beyond her connection to the spirit realm. And I'm just curious, where do you think those influences might have come from? How much was religion and spirituality a part of your upbringing? And what might have inspired?
I've never had anybody ask that question. So I'm going to answer.
That's great. Excellent question.
You're the person that ever asked that question. Back in the 50s, and you know we were poor. Well, for we used to get our food on boats. Is it better?
Yes.
Back in the 50s, what I remember as a child growing up, we were poor. We were on welfare. We got our food off on the back of a truck in a tin can, in a box. Powdered everything, eggs, milk, etc. Our mother used to go to the Catholic Church, and they helped at that time. And the woman that actually was the reason that we were all baptized Catholic, Miss Sarah DeCree was her name. Miss Sarah, you walk in her house or parking in the projects, there was candles lit everywhere. There was pictures of Jesus hanging on the wall, crucifixes. And I mean, the smell of the candles, you couldn't breathe. I mean, I'm talking not one candle, I'm talking about maybe 20, 30 candles lit up in the 3 rooms that she had. And Miss Sarah DeCree was the one that, if it was influenced by anybody, in my opinion, that's who it was. But going back to the spirituality, you know, we all went to grow up in school. And so a lot of that upbringing from the Catholic Church. And our mother, even though she didn't go to church every Wednesday, Sunday, or whatever, she made sure that we were Catholic and that we were given the best opportunity that she could, because our mother never had that opportunity. And she wanted the best for all of us. So that's part one of your answer. Now there's another part to that. You have to go back to, you weren't here last night. So the story I told was about my great-great-grandmother, Martha Tweedy. Martha Tweedy was the hardest person for me to find. I found everybody else but her. And a few years back, I think it was around 2019, I'm sitting there And it was the time of the Tulsa massacre. So I was wanting to do some research on the Tulsa massacre because, as you know, there was a lot of people that were murdered and everything else. And we don't know who they are, or where they are, or anything else. And in listening to the documentary and the research, they started talking about Native Americans. So I said, oh, okay. There was history in our family that we were Cherokee, which I kind of doubted at the time and still do. But I started looking on the rolls in Oklahoma. There was Martha Trudy. So, and long story short, Martha Tweedy was a slave that was traded to the Cherokee Nation and then went on the Trail of Tears. How she got back is anyone's guess. I have no clue. The history that I read was the blacks that did return, because they did return back to their states, they walked. So, double that. So, spirituality, Martin, because this was his question. Because he said, oh, tribal could be anything, Indian, whatever. I think August may have been drawn in from the Native American side rather than the Jamaican side. Because I've had strange family members who say to me, we come from the West Indies. No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah, our trade used to get up and she was Jamaican. No, I can't love Jamaican. No, just because she could dance. We would never come from somewhere where we know we didn't come from. So. Jacob Cotton, my great-grandfather, Sarah Ellis' husband. He was a slave also. He came from Mississippi. I showed him as a slave on the bill of sale in 1850. She was 15 years old. So if you want to draw, you go back to Mississippi. There's a lot of influence, a lot of hoodoo going on, but we didn't kill no chickens, okay? We didn't kill any chickens. So the spirituality part, I think that runs deep. And I think August knew that. I think he knew a little bit more than he told me, because we were supposed to make a trip to Spear, and we never made it. I did after we passed. So hopefully that answered your question.
Excellent. Mr. Kittel, thank you. Please join me in thanking
Everybody else?